Is Blade crazy? And I think the answer is yeah, probably. Blade's one of my favorite characters of all time in almost any writing, universe. He's at the top of the list. But let's look at him not from the standpoint of what he physically does, which is very impressive as a Daywalker, but I want to look at what is going on up here in Blade's noodle. Now, looking at Blade, he is obviously this Daywalker. And right off the bat, we understand that Blade has this massive duality. And that's the source of his major conflict. It's this identity dissonance because his two halves are so extreme. He's a half human and he's half vampire. He's caught literally between being a predator and a protector. And in psychology, this is kind of a textbook form of bicultural conflict where this individual never can embrace both sides of their whole. You're never at home in either place, though. You're never at home around humans and you're never at home around vampires. Now, his human side he draws on for his sense of empathy, morality, right, pain, and even senses of love. Whereas vampire side is more about hunger. It's about power. It's about this detachment and being above, and his immortality, which is a gift. Now, he chooses to align with humanity, not because he is human, but because he sees that as his redemption in a sort. He does it in spite of his vampire half, who will get the bulk of his rage, right? They get his rage. And it's a rejection of both himself and something that is his strength and also his curse. And we see Blade, whose personality is in a lot of ways defined by his rage, like his continual ability to have this high functioning, controlled rage. It's not a flaw in the sense that it debilitates him because he uses it as his fuel. It's functional. It's both his coping mechanism that keep his trauma focused, but it's also weaponizing it, which to him is kind of redeeming it in some sense. Obviously, Blade suffers from some massive unresolved childhood trauma. His mother died giving birth to him. Even his short memories seem to capture that in that moment, right? And then she becomes a vampire when she comes back. So we're dealing with a lot of levels of like abandonment, distrust. So this can trigger some deep-seated anger. So he has some issues there in that regard. We see him manifest his trust issues. Blade doesn't trust anybody. Like even his bonds with Whistler, which are few and far between, you can see he has this like real detachment from it. And it's classic avoidance. Even when he's teamed up with the Avengers, like he still keeps everyone at bay, which is just, if there's no closeness or proximity like that, there's no risk of getting hurt. That's classic. So his whole like identity is kind of ruled by this redemption through vengeance. His war on vampires is not really about saving humanity. It's more about atoning for what he is. I'm slaying them to atone for my own identity. So it's a version of this, kind of deep symbolic self-harm, but he's able to focus it externally. He fights so he doesn't have to feel that pain. So he stays in that. He's mostly dry, bitter, but he has some moments of protectiveness that we've seen towards women, obviously, and even children. Though we see Blade to be very protective, and even like the guy at the nightclub, he can be very protective. And outside of all that stuff going on in his noodle, Blade has all that plus a raging addiction in levels no one can really understand. His thirst for blood, it can only be described in context of like heroin, right? Metaphorically, it is heroin. He needs it to survive. He hates it and what it represents at the same time. That's a massive amount of friction all going on inside of one person, that there's a suppression and denial, which is what his serum represents. He experiences withdrawal and pain. His body fights it. So this is a cycle of him having control and then relapsing. And he is constantly walking on this razor's edge. So we see him as a functional addict, essentially. While he's able to be competent and achieve things at a high level, planning, execution, he's still walking this line, like every moment of the day, while still having all this massive trauma that is going on. And his inability to accept his vampire side is kind of the shadow. Right? If we look at Carl Jung's like analysis, the vampire side of Blade is his shadow. He doesn't integrate it. He suppresses it. some we would see like Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and I'll talk about that later. And this is key because it never allows him to be a whole being. And he's going to have to accept that part of himself, just like everything. Right now, he can only be half, so he's a half measure. So you're a weapon, you're not fully a person if you can't come to terms with those things. And I think that's something Nisa had even said to him. So just some profound words, but Blade, you're absolutely badass, but I do see that, yeah, mentally there's some stuff that really going on. And I just want to kind of give take a moment to kind of talk about what's going on, for the inner Blade.